Welcome in, everybody, to episode 2 of our Orbit Football Podcast. We're here with Cade as well as Doc. Doc's on the call today. We're going to be talking college football once again. Doc, we did our college football preview. Now we're getting right back into it. How are we feeling after week 0?
Yeah, it was a great slate of games. I know we were together and watched our Bobbies fall in defeat to San Diego State, but it was a great weekend of games. And let's hop into this USC San Jose State game because I know we both have thoughts on this game. What did you feel like you seen from this game?
Well, I know from USC, a lot of people are very high on them, including myself. I think USC is going to go win the Pac-12 this year. I think they're going to be a good squad. Once again, is going to be USC, but I mean, they look shaky, obviously, in that first half. And I mean, you're going into halftime. You're only up 7 against San Jose State. Yes, in the second half, they turned it on. They almost turned it on enough to where they covered in that ball game. I believe the spread was at 31.5 is what it closed at. And I think USC won that ball game by 28. So, they almost covered that game. But when I look at that team, the main thing about that team is that offense. That offense looked perfectly fine. I mean, Caleb Williams was making, obviously, the play off his back foot. That was almost a 40-plus yard pass
For sure.
where he's already week 0, and the dude's making another Heisman moment, trying to go back-to-back for the Heisman. The only one ever to do it is Archie Griffin. And I think his name will be in that category again this year from Caleb Williams from USC. But, I mean, their offense looked very solid in that ball game, but obviously the question marks of this team are going to be the defense. That's going to be the question marks of this team the entire year. It's going to be how is the defense going to perform, or if the defense is going to step up. And personally, when you see Lincoln Riley and you look at his past teams, Oklahoma teams, he never really had any crazy good defenses on those Oklahoma teams, and he's translated that to USC. So that's the main thing that I'm seeing is that it's a struggle with the defense for USC. But, obviously that offense looked good all throughout the game. They looked really, they look like USC. They look like the exact same team from last year. They're going to put points on the board. But if they face a team that can match them and has just a bit better of a defense, I'm not even talking one of the best defenses in college football. I'm talking just a good defense for even Pac-12 standards. I think a team like that can, keep pace with them offensively is going to give them fits down the stretch of the season.
Yeah, and when you take a look at their defense, they gave up 28 points, but in the first half they were doing a lot of rotations. They had over 20 people on defense enter the game at one point, so a lot of fresh faces. And you were talking about the defense, how Lincoln Riley has never really had a great defense, and I think it all comes on to Alex Grinch. He's been with Lincoln Riley for a while now. He followed him to USC. And, they're going to have to figure out the defense, but they did recruit well, and they were very young last year. So I'm hoping that this USC team is a little bit more balanced this season, because obviously when we look at this offense, I mean, there's going to not be a problem. And this offense is going to put up points. And, if the Pac-12 in its dying year wants to put a team at the forefront of college football, I mean, they're going to have to rely on USC because I think they're the most talented team offensively. Yeah. And obviously, in college football, points will be scored. So if their defense does step up, they were one game away. Just they had to get over the hump and beat Utah, and they couldn't do it for a second time. Last year they lost in the Pac-12 championship and lost, on a 2-point conversion with about 30 seconds left in Utah. So they're gonna have to finally get over that hump. But hopefully this defense looks a little bit better. They looked good in the second half when a lot of their starters were basically mainstaying in the game. But yeah, this USC team was looked a little shaky, but I think they'll improve throughout the season.
Yeah, obviously I'd agree with you. Now let's go into the other big team, the other big game that really happened over the weekend in week 0, and that was over in Ireland, and that's a team that USC will face later on in the season, and that'll be the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Notre Dame took care of business over Navy in that ball game. It was a blowout. I mean, it was a blowout from the onset. 42-3 final. The Fighting Irish take the victory. What are your thoughts on that ball game, especially from Sam Hartman and his first game for the Fighting Irish?
Well, it's funny because we were recording during that game. We started about 20 minutes into it, and we didn't obviously get to watch it live, but I did go back and watch a few plays from that game, a few drives from Notre Dame, and it was complete domination. I mean, yes, it was Navy, but this Notre Dame team, you've never, they have dominated teams, before, like Navy's, and just lower stays of the college football world. But I mean, they looked unstoppable almost, and
Hmm.
hopefully they can keep that momentum flowing because they have a big game at home in 3 weeks. So they're going to want to look to keep pushing with this momentum. I mean, Hartman looked great. I believe 19 for 23, about 250 plus
51.
yards.
51, yeah.
Yeah. So I
Four
mean,
tutties.
it's
I
a
mean,
great start, and obviously with this Notre Dame team, it's going to be all on their freshman wide receivers. Excuse me. It's going to be huge, and I don't know if you know this, but in the first half they did not target a tight end once at all.
yeah,
And
yeah,
when's the last time that's probably happened? You probably gonna have to go
exactly.
all the way back, years and years, and you
Hmm.
know, um, it's a different looking Notre Dame team. Obviously, they did promote within system, but obviously it looked a lot different with Sam Hartman at the helm. So hopefully we get a pretty good game in 3 weeks between the Buckeyes and the Notre Dame Fighting Irish.
It is definitely looking to shape up that way. And one thing that I really noticed from Notre Dame was their ability to also run the football and run the football efficiently. I mean, Audric Estime, dude's going to be one of the better power backs in college football this year. He's a returning guy for Notre Dame. He had a pretty solid season last year. Nothing too crazy, but, respectable numbers. I mean, 16 carries, 95 yards, and 1 touchdown on the ground. He's doing his job. He's picking up, 4+ yards per carry. He's going to do that this year, is Estime, and I think really he's almost kind of an X factor for that Notre Dame team. I think it obviously is more so in their wide receivers and their young talent at other skill positions, but obviously, Estime as well as Chris Tyree is going to be a guy to keep your eye on throughout the year. He's more experienced though. But I think that those guys are also feeding off of really the energy from Sam Hartman, who's a guy that's been a proven winner at Wake Forest, and he's coming into a system, and it just seemed like it was a smooth fit. It was a smooth fit in Week 0. Notre Dame took the big victory in that one. But now we'll move on to a couple predictions in Week 1. It's finally time for actual college football
It's
besides
finally
Week
here.
0. It is finally here, and the biggest game is coming Thursday night. And Thursday night, to open things off, to kick things off on ESPN, Utah and Florida out there in Salt Lake City. How are we feeling about this game between the Gators and the Utes? A game that was almost a classic last year in Week 1 down there in the swamp.
Yeah, last year it was a fantastic game led by Cam Rising and fourth overall pick in the NFL draft, Anthony Richardson. So hopefully we get this again, but I feel like this game is going to lean a little bit more towards Utah this year. Utah obviously had to go into the swamp on Saturday night, which is it's a hard environment to
It's a
go
tough
to.
atmosphere. I
Yeah,
think I
for
was looking
sure.
at it over the last 5 years. I believe Florida has only lost 5 total home games.
Right.
So they're at the swamp. So, like you said, one of the tougher atmospheres, not just in the SEC, but in college football, period,
Yeah,
down
it's
at Ben Hill Griffin Stadium.
it's really not even the fan. Like the fans are obviously good too, but just the humidity and the wetness in the air. It's an extremely hard place to play in. I mean, you are playing in a swamp, so. But
Yeah.
this year we're basically going complete opposite of that. We're going to be in Salt Lake City, Utah. I think Utah has big expectations this year. Florida seems like their coaching staff does seem confident, but I like me and a lot of other fans, we're not feeling great about this Florida team. Personally, I'm going to take Utah to cover 6.5 points. I think they're going to be too good, and I mean, if you watched our preseason breakdowns, I expect Utah to win the Pac-12 and be a great team this season. And I had Florida dead last in the SEC East.
Yeah.
So I'm going to take Utah to win. I'll go 31-17 final score.
Okay, okay, I like that. I like that. I'm gonna agree with you there. I know we were when we recorded at least the opening, the preview of the podcast. We weren't exactly sure if Rising was going to be ready to go, but it sounds like he is going to be ready to go for that Week 1 matchup there on Thursday night. So obviously, I have the same exact gripes about Florida. You have them finishing bottom in the SEC East. I have them finishing second to last in the SEC East, while you have Utah winning the Pac-12, and I have Utah toward the top of the Pac-12. I think that Utah gets things done. I do also think that they cover 6.5. I just think that the experience, that team, they've got high aspirations once again. Team that's won the Pac-12 back-to-back years. They've gone to the Rose Bowl back-to-back years. They haven't won the Rose Bowl though. They're trying to do something for that program that really would be just it would explode that program. It would make that program do even greater thing than it's already done. But yeah, I'm taking Utah minus 6.5. I'm gonna go. I like 31-17, but I'm gonna switch it up a little bit. I'm gonna go 34. I'm going to go 34-14 Utes. I think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going 34-14. They're beating Florida by 20. But now to the second game on the docket Thursday night, it's got a couple eyes on it, specifically because of Matt Ruley and what he's going to do in his first ball game at the Nebraska Cornhuskers as they travel to Minneapolis and take on the Minnesota Golden Gophers for their opening game of the season on Thursday night. That one will be on Fox up there at Minneapolis. How are we feeling about this one? There's a couple Big Ten games that are conference games this week. How are we feeling about this game in particular?
You hit on it. It's a Matt Rule-led team. Obviously has been out of the college football coaching ranks for the last 2 seasons with the Carolina Panthers. Things didn't end out there too particularly well, but he is back in Nebraska. That program has a ton of momentum right now, and it seems like Minnesota is kind of going the opposite direction. They've, 3 seasons ago, they had, great teams. Last year it just didn't kind of work out well. I mean, they just kind of floated around the Big Ten, and they're obviously losing offensive captain Mo Ibrahim to the NFL, which is going to be big. They're also losing Tanner Morgan to, I guess not to the NFL, but just due to graduation. Yeah. Now Nebraska, they're coming in, they're pumped, they're ready to play. They do have to go on the road, and it will be a tough environment to play at Minnesota. But I just don't think, when you think of Minnesota atmosphere, you think of the weather. The weather is going to really help them out. But I mean, it's going to be, I believe the 1st of September. I'm not for sure exactly what the day is. Maybe the last day of August. It's going to be a hot day, probably.
Last day of August. Yeah, day of August.
Yeah, so it's going to be pretty neutral, I would imagine. Nebraska, I think they just got too much momentum. Jeff Sims is going to have to come in and take over that Nebraska quarterback job from Casey Thompson. So everyone's saying that Nebraska looks, pretty solid in camp, and I'm going to go ahead and take Nebraska to beat Minnesota. I think it's going to be a little bit low scoring. I'm going to go 24-16, but I do think Nebraska will be able to pull it out in the end.
Okay, so Nebraska, the favorite actually in that game is Minnesota. Minnesota by 7 is what it stands right now as we're recording this. But, I know you're high on Nebraska this year. I know you like that team, and I understand that Minnesota is losing a lot offensively. I mean, obviously, like you said, Mo Ibrahim, he's gone. And I thought he was one of the most versatile backs in college football. It could have been. I don't know if it really came to fruition because of injuries over his years with the Golden Gophers, but I mean, yeah, they got to start new, but I don't know. In my predictions, I think I had Minnesota finishing 3rd in the West, and I don't know. I agree with you where I think it's going to be a very low-scoring game. I don't think there's going to be a lot of points scored in this ball game. I think the defenses are going to shine. I think it's just going to be old-fashioned Big Ten football. But if I had to go with one and what my gut is really telling me right now, I'm going to go Minnesota. I think Minnesota gets the job done. I think they win that ball game 17-13. That's how low scoring I think it's going to be. But I think
we're going
Nebraska.
The 90s Big Ten round.
Yes, we are. But I think Nebraska does cover that ball game. I think that they're going to be competitive. I think that game's going to be close, but I think that game might be a bit sloppy.
Definitely.
Not because the defense
to be a high turnover game.
Yeah, not because the defense is just too crazy, but because there's too many question marks at offense. But I'm going to go Minnesota in that ball game over Nebraska, but I think Nebraska covers in that ball game. But speaking of Nebraska, a team that they take on in week 2, Colorado. Colorado, big game, first game with Deion Sanders manning the ship for the Buffaloes, and they will travel to a team that went to the national championship last year. Granted, they got blown out by Georgia in almost humiliating fashion, but they're taking on the TCU Horned Frogs. That is true. You do have to be there to get blown out, but Colorado traveling to TCU, they're going to Fort Worth for the opening game of the season. The Fox Big Noon game back on Saturday. How are we feeling about this game?
listen, folks. There's a reason why we did not break down Colorado in our breakdown. We're both in agreement that this team is just not going to be a good team. Yes, they do have individual athletes and great talents. Mr. Hunter going to be playing receiver and corner. Shadur Sanders at quarterback, but that's your dynamite right there. Is those two players, and I just do not think Colorado will not be. I'm not buying the Colorado hype.
Yeah.
Do I want them to fail? No, I don't. I just I've seen predictions where they're gonna win 7-8 games. I've even seen predictions or I've seen bets post that they're gonna win the Pac-12, and I I just don't see a viable way that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
although TCU did lose I believe 65-7 in the national championship,
Yes.
giving this team 20 and a half
65, either
points at home.
65-7 or 65-3. It was 65 to side.
They scored a
something.
touchdown.
Okay. Then
but-
yeah, 7.
But giving this team 20 and a half points at home against a team that just is not going to be very good, I think it's almost free money at this point. Yeah, is Max Duggan gone? Yeah, is Quentin Johnson gone? Yeah, is I do not see a way where Colorado covers 20 and a half points at TCU. I'm gonna go ahead and pick TCU, 41 to 15.
Okay. 41-15. He's going TCU in that ball game. I agree with you. I think TCU is going to take care of business in this game, but I think there's a lot more question marks because didn't TCU also lose their offensive coordinator? I was going to say, I'm pretty sure, didn't Garrett Riley leave that
went
squad?
To Clemson.
That's what I'm saying, and that's where I'm a bit concerned for this team because, like you said, they lost Max Duggan. And Max Duggan, now granted, a lot of people forget about this from last year, but Max Duggan going into that week 1 for TCU wasn't even really the starting quarterback yet for that squad.
It was a QB battle.
It was, and I think I'm pretty sure they're going to go Chandler Morris this year.
Yes.
I think that's who they're going to roll with at QB. Yes. But, I mean, obviously, how's that going to be? Now, Morris has played a bit in the past. He played a bit in the season prior, but, I don't know. I feel like TCU's got a couple question marks. Not that Colorado doesn't. I mean, obviously, I'm not high on Colorado, and I'm pretty high on TCU, but I just think because it's week 1 and because of when this game is happening, I think TCU wins. I do. I think TCU wins this ball game, but I think Colorado, I'm gonna make this. I think Colorado covers this game. I really do. And I think that's a bit of a hot take there that I think that Colorado covers, but I don't know. TCU just has too many of those question marks that need answered. I think that once those questions get answered, then, I might be more comfortable in this team. But because it's week 1, I do think TCU wins, but I think Colorado covers. And I'm going to go a final score of this game. I'm going to go 34. I'm going to go 34 to 21. 34-21 TCU.
Ooh, that's close.
Takes the victory over Colorado. Now, I know that sounds close, but I think that TCU dominates that. I think that TCU leads probably by 3 scores for a majority of that ball game. Yeah, and I think Colorado scores a late touchdown, and that probably gets them to cover really in that ball game, at least cover comfortably. But that's what I'm feeling from that ball game. But now to move on to a team that, with speaking of uncertainty, let's talk about the team with probably the largest, the most coverage when it's came to a QB battle. It's really between them and Alabama, but the Ohio State Buckeyes. There's 2 guys going into this game. Ryan Day has said he's using both of them going into this game. He's going to use Devin Brown, and he's going to use Kyle McCord in this ball game. They're taking on Indiana at Indiana. It's the first edition of the Big Ten on CBS. We're going to get Brad Nessler and we're going to get Gary Danielson calling Big Ten football for the first time. Not that Nessler and Danielson haven't called Big Ten football, but they're doing it on CBS. Ohio State currently favored at 30. Obviously, we both think that they're going to win this game.
Yes.
But what, because of that spread and because of how much that they're favored and Indiana being healthy, what's this game going to really play out to be?
I mean, obviously you said it. I think we're both taking Ohio State to win this game. Even though they are going on to the road at Bloomington, and Indiana's gave Ohio State fits, 6, 7 years ago, but in the recent years, it really just has not been that close at all. Especially the last, 2 seasons. But whenever we've gotten Indiana, they've seemed to gotten banged up and just playing us at the really wrong time. But now they get us in the opening season, or to open their season, and like you said, they're going to be playing two different quarterbacks, and I do think Indiana covers 30 points. Just not because of kind of everything I've said, just the I think the nature of this Ohio State team is going to be completely different. We're used to them scoring 50 points on anyone who's not ranked in the top five, or not top five but top 25, and even some teams that are even ranked in the top five, we have 50 on them at halftime. That's happened before. So that Michigan State game, in recent history. But, this team is going to be a little bit different. I think, we're going to really have to rely on a Jim Knowles defense to be able to be the backbone of this team to, help this offense get going early on. Maybe at the end of the year, we'll see this offense open up and be able to explode like we've seen in the recent, in the recent seasons. But I think, this game will probably end with Ohio State maybe in the mid to high 30s, maybe low 40s. But, in the past, Ohio State's, they could have put up 50 plus on this Indiana team. So I think I'm going to go ahead and go final score 38-13. Indiana does cover. Not really a competitive game, but, I think Ohio State, if they can come out and show that, they're going to be dominant up front and be able to lock down, Big Ten East competition. Well, I guess Big Ten West, but are they in the? Yeah, they are in the East.
No, Big Ten East. Indiana's in the East. Yeah.
Excuse me there, but just to be able to show that they can, shut down, Big Ten competition, I think is going to be a bigger, part of this game rather than, them trying to put up points, because I think they're trying to figure out who they want at quarterback for that Notre Dame game.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard a lot of things about that quarterback battle. I've heard that, McCord, he's the experienced guy. He's been there a bit longer than Brown, but I've heard that Brown can be a little bit more exciting with the way that he plays, where it seems like McCord is more of the game manager. Brown might be more of the playmaker in that sense. But
Brown is definitely the more typical Ohio State quarterback in the past few seasons.
Yeah, yes, and it depends, but both obviously being highly recruited guys, both obviously going to Ohio State, sitting behind C.J. Stroud, a top 3 pick in the NFL draft last year. I mean, you've seen a guy like that, and you've got the talent around you. I mean, that's the other thing of this Ohio State team that I personally think. You talked about Indiana being healthy. I'm going to talk about Ohio State being healthy into this game, because Travion Henderson is healthy, Mayan Williams is healthy, Dallin Hayden is healthy, and Evan Pryor is healthy, and all 4 of those players can get snaps in the backfield for Ohio State. And it does, it might happen. It might happen on Saturday where we see all 4 of those guys getting snaps in the backfield for Ohio State. Maybe with Pryor, they use him out wide a bit more because of his versatility with his speed, and even Travion Henderson possibly using as a receiver. But the other thing is, they got Marvin Harrison Jr. Right. They've got Emeka Egbuka. They've got Julian Fleming. Cade Stover is back. Now, granted, that offensive line we talked about in our preview is new and is a bit of a question mark for the Buckeyes, but I don't know. I think I liked your score prediction of 38-13. I did like that score prediction, but I'm going to bump it up. I think that the Buckeyes score one more touchdown. I think that they win that ballgame 45-13. I think it's relatively around that like 28-7 range for a while in the second half, and then the Buckeyes score a couple touchdowns and kick a couple field goals late. But I'm going to go 45-13, and I think Ohio State just slightly covers that ball game against Indiana. Like I said, it's going to be interesting, but because of the playmakers, because of Ohio State being at full strength, Granted, I understand that the quarterback situation is different, but you've got all this talent and you've got all these dynamic playmakers around you. I think that they're going to put points on the board because it's Indiana. If we were talking about maybe a more all around solid team like possibly an Iowa team, it'd be a different situation, or even another Big Ten West team like a Minnesota or not exactly Wisconsin, but Illinois. It's one of those teams that has more of a packed defense. I would possibly pick that team to shut them down because it's week one, but I don't know. I just 45-13. I think Ohio State covers. But to another game that I've seen talked about on social media, a bit interesting because people think that a certain upset might be happening in this ball game, but I don't know if you and I really truly see it, and that's between the Washington Huskies and the Boise State Broncos. Also a 3:30 kick, that one being on ABC out there in Seattle. Washington hosts Boise State. Boise State in the past has taken down some opponents that have been Pac-12 opponents and have been ranked pretty high, but I don't think that this is the Boise State teams of the Kellen Moore era anymore. And when you got to take down a team with such a dynamic offense and the Washington Huskies, I don't know if an upset is really happening in this game.
Yeah, I think this game will be competitive in the first half. I mean, we really didn't get into it, but I actually do think Boise State does win the Mountain West Conference. I think they're going to be a pretty good team, and if they're ranked in the top 25 at some point in the season, do not be shocked because this Broncos team is pretty solid. But like you said, I just don't see it. I think it could be a 10 to 13, 14 point game at halftime, but I think in the second half, especially the fourth quarter, I think Washington will show that talent that they have and be able to pull away because we know that offense is very explosive at any moment. Are they losing some talent on offense? Yes, I believe they're starting 3 new offensive linemen this year, at least 2, but I believe it's 3, and they lost a few receivers to the draft, but I do think Michael Penix and Kalen DeBoer, I think they'll figure it out. This offense is going to be fantastic to watch, and it is going up against Andy Avalos defense, so that'll be an interesting matchup to see. Maybe Andy Avalos does outcoach Kalen DeBoer, and we get a really close game in the fourth quarter. And honestly, I would love to because those Boise State teams, when they were competitive, it was great for college football. And
yes, it was.
Obviously the Kellen Moore era, everyone knows how dangerous those Boise State teams were, but we're not in the Kellen Moore era anymore. And I'm gonna go Washington. I'm gonna go. I don't think they'll put it on Boise State. I'm gonna go 42 to 24.
Okay. I like that score. So you're going to have Washington covered. They're favored by 14.5 in that ball game. When I'm looking at it, I like that score. I do. I'm going to bump it up whenever I get to my final score. I think that Washington is just that offense, man. I mean, Michael Penix Jr. is going to be he's going to be a Heisman candidate. He is. And I think that they're going to be a very solid team this year, are the Huskies. I like that offense. I like that team. I like that system. Granted, a little bit more youth on the offensive line, but like you said, this isn't exactly a Boise State team from that era, from about not exactly a bygone era, but from a past era where they were, being able to get in BCS bowls and compete. I do think that Boise State does score in this ball game. I think this ball game is close for a while, as you mentioned, for a majority of the first half, but I'm going to go 52-31. I think Washington beats Boise State in that ball game. But now we'll move down to, Washington obviously going to be in conference realignment here come next season, and with the last season of the Pac-12, at least as we know it, this year, as Washington will be moving to the Big Ten, and a team that currently moved and transitioned already to a bigger conference this year. The Houston Cougars moved up to the Big 12 this year. They will be taking on the UTSA Roadrunners, who also moved up. They went from Conference USA to the American Conference this year. Houston at home hosting UTSA, UTSA, a program that's not very, it hasn't been in existence very long. I believe it's roughly 15 years, even if that program has really existed there for the Roadrunners. But they've built a very solid program there. They've rightfully earned their spot in the American Conference, but they are surprisingly favored on the road against Houston in this ball game by 1.5. They are favored heading into this ball game. How are we feeling about that line, and how are we feeling about the Roadrunners?
Feel like it's an evenly placed line. I would probably favor Houston by 1.5, but obviously when you're giving out 1.5, we don't really know how to lean. Houston obviously going to be without Clayton Tune for the first time in a while. Clayton Tune in the NFL now. Donovan Smith going to be the starting quarterback. I believe he's a junior. Dana Holgerson announced it about a week and a half ago. So we're going to see what that looks like. Clayton Tune obviously was a fantastic quarterback and got Houston, he won them some games last year. And, talking about, UTSA now, they're losing Will Stein, their offensive coordinator. When he came in, he kind of, he didn't turn that program around, but that program turned around with his arrival. That offense became more explosive. I do think Houston will take this one. It'll be a close game, but I just think the coaching experience of Dana Holgerson, I think he's going to learn a little bit from last year's game, and I think they're going to be able to take this one home. I think it'll be a good old-fashioned Dana Holgerson shootout. I'm going to go ahead and go 52 to 42. The Cougars take it out.
Okay, so you're going full offense in that ball game.
We're talking mid 2010s Big 12 play here.
Yeah. Houston, I predicted them in. I think they were in my bottom four. I think they were in my bottom four of the Big 12 when I went and I did those predictions recently. But yeah, I mean, UTSA is obviously a team that's been good over the past couple years as a group of five squad. They had a decent season once again last year. They produced some good talent. They've been trying to really compete with some of those bigger programs, some of those programs like Houston that they've put on the schedule, and they're going to say we're going to go into your place and we're going to try to take you on here. I mean, that game, it gets a lot of national exposure for UTSA too. That game's 7:00 on FS1, but Houston, I agree with you. I think Houston's going to take this victory. I do think that the offense is going to be there. I do. But I'm going to go a little closer. I don't think they win by 10. I'm going to go 42. I'm going to go 42-38. I think that the Houston Cougars get the job done over the UTSA Roadrunners in that ball game. But now, too, we talked earlier about, the Big Ten being on CBS. Well, now the Big Ten is also going to be on NBC this year. 7:30 kick on NBC. We will see the Mountaineers, West Virginia, traveling to Pennsylvania to take on the Penn State Nittany Lions. It's the first time we're seeing the Big Ten on the NBC. 7:30 kick, as mentioned. Opening ball game, Penn State. I know you're high on this team. I know you got this team winning the Big Ten. But I know you like West Virginia. I know that you're big for the Mountaineers. How are we feeling that they might be able to fare in this ball game, first night game in Beaver Stadium?
So this one's hard for my heart, really.
Yeah.
I love Penn State and what they're looking like, and I'm loving West Virginia not for what they look like, but just for who they are. But I think Penn State is going to dominate this game. Maybe 20.5 is a lot of points with the Penn State offense. Who knows? They could win this game by 40 and just blow West Virginia out, or they could also just take control up 14, up 17, and just kind of cruise control from there on. But talking about West Virginia, I mean, this is a huge game for Neil Brown. He is feeling the pressure, I would imagine. I think a lot of people, including me, I thought he was, I thought last year was going to be his final season with the Mountaineers, but he's back around with the new athletic director. So, this is a big game. If he can go on the road and take down the Nittany Lions, and a really highly touted team by a lot of the media, and myself and even yourself, you may not be as high as me, but
I still
Penn
think
State
that they're
is a
going to be a
top 10
top
team.
I was
for
going to say,
sure.
I think I personally think they're going to be another top 5 team in college football this year. It's just unfortunately they got to play Michigan and Ohio State on their schedule.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
that's just how it is.
Yeah, but so this West Virginia game, this game is huge for West Virginia. But I do think Penn State will take it, and I do think they will cover just barely. I'm gonna go 35-7. I
Okay.
just don't know if this West Virginia team is going to be able to score. Graham Harrell is not there as offensive coordinator there, and JT Daniels is gone.
Yeah.
This West Virginia team is going to have to find its identity quickly, and it does not help that it starts off against Penn State in a whiteout.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with you. Obviously, I just stated that I think Penn State going to be one of the top 5 teams in the country once again this year. If I looked at it and I had to rank them probably by the end of the year, what I think the top 5 teams in the country are going to be talent-wise, maybe not by record-wise or how they'll be ranked. I think it's going to be Michigan. I think LSU, Ohio State, Georgia, and Penn State is going to be my 5 of the top teams in the country. Now, granted, Florida State will still be in that conversation, USC, but I like Penn State again this year. I do. Not that I didn't like Penn State by putting them at 10-2 this year, finishing 3rd in the Big Ten East. I do. I just think next year is their year. I still think that they're going to be a very solid team this year, and I think they are going to cover. I think they're going to beat West Virginia 38-13 in that ball game, their home opener, that one being on NBC. But now for the Saturday night football ball game on ABC, we've got a neutral site matchup between the North Carolina Tar Heels and the South Carolina Gamecocks. We're opening this one. It's the Duke Mayo Classic there at Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. North Carolina favored by 2.5. South Carolina did turn it on at the end of the year last year. They played spoiler to a couple teams. Could they play spoiler in this opening game? Not that it's not exactly a spoiler with the 2.5 line, but do you think that the Gamecocks could pull this out?
I think this game is going to be fantastic to watch. I do think this is a bad matchup for North Carolina. This game kind of reminds me of South Carolina Tennessee from last season. More for the reason just of the similarities I think North Carolina this year and Tennessee will have from last season. I just think South Carolina is going to be too physical for North Carolina up front, and I think they'll be able to control that game and kind of shut down that North Carolina offense through their own offense, because I think South Carolina could easily put 50 plus up in this game.
Yeah.
We've seen App State put, I believe, almost 60 on North Carolina last year, if not 60.
Yes. I think it was 62-59 was the final of that ball game.
Although it did go into overtime still. I think the South Carolina game North Carolina game could get out of hand. But I hope not, because Carolina rivalry game, some of the nicest jerseys in college football, Bank of America Stadium in Charlotte. I mean, this game has all the makings to be an instant classic. It's just I don't think it will be. I'm going to go ahead and take South Carolina to cover 2.5 points. I'm going to go 52-35. I think this game could be really high scoring. I just think South Carolina and that SEC talent is just going to be a little bit too much for the Tar Heels.
Okay. I think I like your sentiments of picking the Gamecocks. I do. Not that North Carolina isn't going to be a solid program this year, but when you look at, they lost Josh Downs. He was the ACC wide receiver of the year the past two seasons for the Tar Heels, and he was a lot for that offense. He really was. And granted, they have Drake May, who's also a Heisman candidate, but maybe a possible Heisman dark horse on the other side, Spencer Rattler.
Right.
I think that South Carolina is going to be a solid team again. I think they're getting 8 to 9 wins again, which is nothing to scoff at for that program. They had a good year last year. They had those upsets, as mentioned, to Tennessee and Clemson, and I think they do get the job done. I think it's a bit closer, though. I do think it's a bit closer. I think that Drake May will keep North Carolina in that ball game. I think that he will. I do think South Carolina takes the victory, but I'm going to go 38-34. I'm going to go Gamecocks taking the victory there for that Saturday night football matchup on ABC. But now for another matchup on ABC, this one being on Sunday, and this one is probably the best game, probably the game of the week. Obviously,
could be game of the year.
Oh, yeah, it could be game of the year this year, and it's going to be between the LSU Tigers and the Florida State Seminoles, being, the Camping World kickoff down there in Orlando, Florida. Camping World Stadium, 7:30 kick on Sunday evening. LSU's favored at 2.5. I think we already kind of know who you're thinking about who's winning this ball game, and I think people know who I think is winning this ball game. But what are your thoughts heading into this matchup?
This game has been on my calendar since since time was created. I mean, we're gonna get to watch Jared Verse versus Harold Perkins on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
We're gonna watch Jaden Daniels versus Jordan Travis on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, this game is gonna be an instant classic. I think it's almost guaranteed. Man, this game is gonna be so good. You did hint on it, and I did state that I believe Florida State will win my national championship this year. I'm going to go ahead and take Florida State. I think it's going to be a little bit lower scoring. I'm going to go 24-19.
Okay, so very similar score to last year's ball game. Okay.
I think I don't know how this game's really going to play out. I have a gut feeling that Florida State will find themselves just on defense stopping LSU at the end of the game. Man, I'm excited. It's going to be in Orlando too, so definitely not going to be on LSU side, because last year it was a very hostile environment for the Seminoles, and they came in and still took it. Although they had to block a PAT at the end of the game to do it. Yeah. And any way you can get a win, you can get a win. And now this time you have it in your home state. It's in Orlando. It's right down the road. I'm gonna take the Seminoles, 24-19.
And obviously, as I mentioned in our and also in our preview, I like LSU to win the SEC this year, and I like them to do it with one loss. And I think that loss is in conference. I get it's a hostile environment. I get they're basically going on the road here to go take on Florida State. But I don't know, something about the returning talent on this team, returning talent really on both of these teams. There's so much like NFL talent going to be in this game. I mean,
this is a game you look back at 5 years and like, wow, he's in the league. He's in the league.
Yes. And I mean, I am high on LSU. I think they're making the playoff. I think they're winning the SEC. I think they're winning this ball game. But I think it's going to be very close once again. I do think, since they're only favored by 2.5, I do think, based off my final score prediction, Florida State covers. I do. I'm going to go 31-29 final. LSU Tigers take the victory, but Florida State does cover in the ball game. So that's the Sunday night matchup. That's the matchup that everybody's got their eyes on. So let's wrap things out with the final game of Week 1. Monday night, it's Labor Day. ACC always really has that spot reserved for a ball game. And this year, they've got Clemson and Duke on that Monday night game, 8 o'clock kickoff on ESPN on September 4th. Clemson, I know you're not very high on Clemson. I do have them going to the ACC championship game this year. Could we see an upset? Could we see an upset Week 1 with Riley Leonard and company for the Blue Devils?
So this game is very interesting because if you look at Duke's schedule, they're gonna have to play a gauntlet for ACC standard, and will they make a bowl game? I'm not for sure. They have a tough schedule ahead of them.
Yeah.
But this is Week 1, and we're starting fresh against a fresh Clemson team.
Yep.
I'm gonna take Duke outright. It's at home.
Really?
I guarantee it's going to be a fantastic crowd at Duke. For Duke standards, but all it takes is one game to really get things flowing. And last year, I mean, they had a great seasons for all accounts of that program. And I think Mike Elko is going to be a fantastic coach. I'm expecting Riley Leonard to just be able to, as long as their front seven holds up against pressure, that's mostly what I'm worried about. Clemson is how they're going to be able to get pressure, which obviously in turn makes the secondary, A, more tired, and B, they're covering for longer, which means it's going to be easier for receivers to get open. And I love this passing advantage that I think Duke is going to have, and I think their defense is going to be able to hold up well enough. Even if they don't win, I do think they 100% cover 13 points. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and take Duke outright. I'm going to go 28-25.
Okay.
It's not basketball, folks. It's football.
Yeah. I got a similar score. I do have a similar score, but I'm gonna go the other way. I am gonna go the other way. I think that Clemson wins. I don't know. It's still Clemson, in my opinion. I understand that the past 2 years have not been the Clemson football of old with Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson, and even really possibly Kelly Bryant era standards of Clemson. But it's still Clemson. They still got Will Shipley on offense, very dynamic, H-back style of player. Cade Klubnik, he didn't look. I mean, he won the starting job. He did. DJ Uiagalelei is off, and he's going to Oregon State.
Oregon State, yes.
Yeah, and Klubnik is their guy. I am scared for this team. I did have them in my ACC championship game. I did have them going 10-2 in the regular season with one conference loss, or actually no, I actually had them undefeated going into the championship game, but in conference, I do have them losing 2 games, and because of that, I think they take care of business against Duke. I do. I have the same exact question marks that you have though about this team, about how they've, what's the defensive front seven
How
gonna
they'll
look
replenish.
like? Yeah, yes, they I mean, there's question marks.
Yeah, going back to these Clemson teams that you were talking about, they were always, even though they had offensive talent, defensive minded. They under Brett Venables, they were always a defensive, almost masterclass. Really.
Yeah.
I know. No, maybe those Trevor Lawrence teams, were offensive minded just because you had such a great talent at quarterback. But Clemson's defense always was reliable, and it got the offense to really click. So if you get a Clemson team with a questionable defense, in my opinion at best, and a second year defensive coordinator who hasn't really had much experience outside of last year, and last year he had his his bad moments, that Notre Dame game especially. I really like Duke in this one, but obviously I'm doubting Clemson, but it's more of that feeling that I get from Texas every year. It's like, well, they should be good, but it's
but
Texas.
Are they going to deliver?
Is Sark going to be good? You create misconceptions, but I really do have my worries about this Clemson team, and I wasn't high on them last year, and they did better than I expected. So obviously that could happen again this year. And once again, I love Cade Klubnik, and I think Garrett Riley was a fantastic addition. I think it's going to make that offense more modern. Maybe not more modern, but more spread style. And I think DJ is going to be a great quarterback at Oregon State for what they do. They're going to run the ball a ton, but I do think that Cade Klubnik will be a better college, a better quarterback overall. Just being able to sling the rock wherever on the field.
Yeah. And that turns me over to my final score. I know you like Duke. I know you're taking Duke outright, but I'm going to go 27-23. Clemson gets the victory on the road against the Duke Blue Devils. I think Duke covers in that game, but I'm going to go Clemson. But you hinted at what our really final segment of the day is, and then that's going to be upsets. We have our upset of the week. We're going to go picks. I'll let you start off. We were just talking about Oregon State. Let's jump right into it. I'll let you start off here. What's your upset of the week, Doc?
So I'm going to go ahead and take San Jose State over Oregon State. I know I have Oregon State in my top 15, almost top 10 in my AP poll, but it's kind of weird. San Jose State, they've already got to play a game. They figured out some of the kinks that maybe, they figured out against USC. And Oregon State, they're walking in, they're going to try to run the ball. And, what happens if San Jose State, they're able to stop the run, and, they're going to make DJ pass, week one, kind of be uncomfortable. And obviously, not the best receiver talent Oregon State, just because that's not what they're going to primarily do. So I'm going to go ahead and take San Jose State over Oregon State. I just think this is, I don't think it's likely, but I think out of all the upsets that are going to be able to, pull this weekend, I like this one over a lot of other games.
Yeah, and I'll turn it over to mine. There's 2 I had in mind, and 2 of them were MAC versus Big Ten games in week 1. Both are being hosted by Big Ten teams. The one that I thought about was A game that's earlier in the week. I believe it's the Friday night game. And it's Central Michigan at Michigan State on FS1. I thought about that one because of Michigan State and Mel Tucker this year and how I have that team finishing last in the Big Ten East. But I'm going to go with a team that's very, very, I want to say, new this year with how much they've lost on defense, with how much they somewhat lost on offense even. And that is the Illinois Fighting Illini. They're taking on Toledo, the MAC champions from last year. Toledo, they're returning Flynn at quarterback. Right now, Illinois is favored at 9.5. But you know what? I think for my upset of the week, I'm going to go Toledo Rockets over the Illinois Fighting Illini. That's going to be my upset of the week, and that'll be all we've got today. There's
actually some breaking news. So
about an hour
ago, Matt Rule already not having a great time. Tight end and two-time transfer Eric Gilbert was arrested in Lancaster, Nebraska. So
interesting.
Obviously, the former Georgia commit and just troublesome off the field. Eric Gilbert looks like he will not be playing this week, and obviously there has not been anything ruled, but that's not great to start off with. So hopefully,
we ended it there we talked about that game early on. We talked about the Big Ten West with Illinois. That's interesting. That's interesting to keep a note on moving into that game where Nebraska takes on Minnesota, folks. It's almost time for Week 1 football. It's almost time for things to kick off. We've got some solid games. We recapped them here today in episode 2 of this podcast today of the Orbit Football Media, podcast. We had a great time. We went right at it again. We gave us some predictions, but that'll be all for this episode. Make sure to watch our podcast on Spotify as well as follow us on our social medias, our Twitter, as well as our Instagram at OrbitFB Media. Make sure to follow us there on those social accounts. But for Doc, this is Cade signing off, episode 2 of the Orbit Media Football Podcast.